Greetings, everyone. It is November 2nd. It's the Sabbath after the Feast of Tabernacles, the last great day. And the feast was kind of refreshing. There were a lot of things that were not ideal, but there were a lot of things that were quite good. And it's kind of unusual. Anyway, we're still in Nehemiah. We're in Nehemiah 11, and we're going to go through hopefully all three of these chapters, but we'll see how far we get. A lot of them are just naming things, names, and this and that and the other thing. So we'll see how we do. We'll start in verse 1. And the rulers of the people dwelt at Jerusalem, and the rest of the people also cast lots to bring 1 in 10 to dwell in Jerusalem, the holy city, and 9 parts to dwell in other cities. And verse 2, and the people blessed all the men that willingly offered themselves to dwell at Jerusalem. So somebody asked before we started services about these two verses, and it seems to me that the reason everyone didn't want to dwell in Jerusalem is because the Babylonians had utterly destroyed it. It was leveled. And they rebuilt the temple and they rebuilt the walls. But a lot of the rest of the city was just rubble. And it's not right near croplands. You're on those hills, and there's not a lot of way to make a living easily there, except with an established population and, doing business and whatnot. And that was not the hub of all activity at that point. So it was difficult to be in Jerusalem, living there at that time. And, there's not much more you can say about that. It was a lot of rubble, and my suspicion is that water was hard to come by to some degree. Jerusalem's always had a water issue because it's on top of a mountain. How many cities have you ever seen around the world that are on top of a mountain with no stream and with no river and with nothing except one small spring down below the city to help the city survive? I've always thought this is a little interesting, just as an exercise. Why is Jerusalem even a city? Nobody builds cities on mountains. They don't do it. Look around you and try to find a mountain or a city that's built on a mountain anywhere else in the world. And I don't mean just a little town, but I mean a city. Really unusual. Usually they're built in a valley near the mountains. Usually they're built in the plains right beside the mountains so that they can grow and expand, and it's easy, like Denver or, I don't know. Lots and lots of cities. They're almost always large cities are almost always on one or more rivers. They're frequently right next to the ocean, but they're always on rivers. Rare exceptions. And they're never on mountains, with extremely rare exceptions. And yet God chose to build his house, his mountain, his city, everything, his nation, the capital, on top of a mountain. There's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not going to go over all the reasons for that because we're in Nehemiah, but the reality is that this is interesting. And if you ever want to try to understand what God's all about, you really have to know that this is important, that he built his house and chose to put his name on top of a mountain. It's only 3,500 feet or so, but it's the top of a ridge line that goes for a long ways in north-south. Not a lot of water. The promised land and its capital is on a mountain with one small spring, or maybe a couple of small springs. I'll have to talk about that in a bigger way later. But the reality is that this is important, really important. Why did God's people do so well on top of that mountain? God's the one that makes it rain. And he could change the weather to whatever it was supposed to be. And his people did better or worse if they did what he said. It was more dynamically good for them when God was around, and when they were doing what was right in his sight, everything was good. When it wasn't, it got a little tight. People had to rely on God. But at any rate, verse 2, and the people blessed all the men that willingly offered themselves to dwell at Jerusalem, because there's not a lot of water, because it's up on top of the mountain, and because it was destroyed completely by the Babylonians down to the point where there was not one stone left upon another. Yeah. Verse 3, now these are the chief of the province that dwelt in Jerusalem, but in the cities of Judah dwelt every one in his possession in their cities, to wit, Israel, the priests and the Levites and the Nethinims, and the children of Solomon's servants. And I'm not going to get all weird about the Nethinims. There's so many people that just go off on the Nethinims and, yeah, whatever. Have your own little private fantasies about whatever it is that you're weird about. I'm not going there. Verse 4, and at Jerusalem dwelt certain of the children of Judah, and of the children of Benjamin, and of the children of Judah, Athaiah the son of Uzziah, the son of Zechariah, the son of Amariah, the son of Shephatiah, the son of Mahalaleel of the children of Perez. Pretty famous guy. Verse 5, and Messiah the son of Baruch, the son of Kolhoza, the son of Haziah, the son of Adiah, the son of Joarib, and the son of Zechariah, the son of Shiloni. And all of these people are big. You know who Baruch is, and you know who Zechariah is. And there's a bunch of people here that, you know, you're seeing who these people are. You've heard about them before, and you hear about them again over and over throughout all of these circumstances where God names their names. And these are the sons of Benjamin: Salu, the son of Meshullam, the son of Joed, the son of Pedaiah, the son of Koliah, the son of Messiah, the son of Ithiel, the son of Josiah. And after him, Gebai, Salai, 928. And Joel of Zikri was their overseer, and Judah, the son of Senua, was second over the city. Of the priests, Jediah, the son of Joarib, and Jachin, Sariah, the son of Hilkiah, the son of Meshullam, the son of Zadok, the son of Merioth, the son of Ahitub, was the ruler of the house of God. And everybody knows who Zadok is. If you don't know who Zadok is, you should do a little more study. And I find it interesting in verse 10 there that you've got Jachin being a name of an Israelite. When Jachin and Boaz were the two pillars in the front of the temple, which should raise your suspicions. Because God doesn't name inanimate objects. Names like Jachin and Boaz in his strength and in his counsel. He doesn't name inanimate objects. Verse 11, Sariah, the son of Hilkiah, the son of Meshullam, the son of Zadok, the son of, I already read that one. Merioth, the son of Ahitub, was the ruler of the house of God, and their brethren that did the work of the house were 822. And Adiah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Peliah, the son of Amzi, the son of Zechariah, the son of Pashur, the son of Malchiah. Why am I reading all these names and horribly murdering the pronunciation? Because God recorded them. I don't have any better way of speaking them, and it's important that we speak the things that God wrote in the time that we're reading it. So there you have it. 822 people that did the work of the house of God. And his brethren, chief of the fathers, 242, and Amashai, the son of Azareel, the son of Ahasai, the son of Meshillemoth, the son of Immer, and their brethren, mighty men of valor, and 128. Their overseer was Zabdiel, the son of one of the great men. Yeah, I haven't done a study on the great men, so I'm not sure exactly who we're talking about, but probably the of the people that were the fighters of that time, usually is what that kind of thing refers to, but it could be something else. Verse 15, also the Levites, Shemaiah, the son of Hashab, the son of Azrikam, the son of Hashabiah, and the son of Bunai, and Shabbathai and Jozabad of the chief of the Levites had the oversight of the outward business of the house of God. So there's the inward business, the temple business, and there's the outward business that's relating to all the people around, and dealing with purchases and different things that have to be done with the temple of God, where it interacts with the outside world more. The inner workings of the temple were not secret, but they were related to the garments and related to the sacrifices, related to all of the things that were in the temple. There were anything that was holy was not part of the outward business of the house of God. Okay, except for in limited circumstances. Verse 17, Mattaniah, the son of Micah, the son of Zabdi, the son of Asaph, was the principal to begin the thanksgiving in prayer, and Bakbukiah, the second among his brethren, and Abda, the son of Shammua, the son of Galal, the son of Jeduthun. 18, all the Levites in the holy city were 284. So 284 Levites in the holy city at that time. That's not very many at all. 24 courses. Yay, that's not many people at all to run the temple. Yeah. The way it was originally designed was 24 courses, and that just barely puts like 4 people in each course. So they were all working way overtime compared to what God originally set up. Verse 19, moreover, the porters, Achab and Talmon and their brethren that kept the gates were in 172. And going back to the dearth of Levites at that time, we're kind of in the same circumstance now. When you look at the end time and you look at the laborers in the harvest, there are essentially right now no laborers in the harvest. We're talking almost nobody. And God starts it very small, extremely small. And it's got to grow, and people have to start doing what they're supposed to, and people have to stand up on their own as pillars. And that's in the end how this works, because we're never, well, in a limited way, we'll get together for a time. I'm a bit reticent about saying much about this, but the reality of it is that God's people have to come together, and that there is a necessity for laborers in the harvest, just as these 284 men were in charge of the whole temple when normally it was in the thousands. We're going to have to be doing the same kinds of things, and without the support of money and resources from other people. This is going to be a grassroots kind of circumstance, and it's not going to be about money, because you can't serve God and mammon, period. So reality is that this is going to be a little tough, because it's going to require people that are absolutely dedicated, like at this moment, these 284 men. That was a big, tall order for them to take care of the temple and do everything that was required, was huge. And they probably, honestly, initially, they probably didn't do it very well. There was a learning curve. There were things that had to be done, and there was training all of these people. I mean, you look at the book of Nehemiah, and everybody was ignorant of everything. They didn't know anything that happened in the law. They had to read the whole law and explain it. And there were a few people that knew how to do this and that knew the law. There were few. And they taught more, and they had to get all the people educated enough to where they could actually do even a little bit of what they were supposed to. And then they had to get the Levites on board with not only the things that they were supposed to be doing, but actually get the temple sacrifice and services actually operating. And that's no small feat. So the reality of the whole thing is that it was a little hit and miss. If God hadn't been there blessing them the whole time, I don't know if they could have accomplished it. I mean, just as men doing what men do, it might have taken them decades to get it all functioning the way God originally intended. But the thing about it is that God blesses us when we do what he wants us to do. And in this time, we're deathly short of laborers in the harvest. And the job description for laborers in the harvest is a lot different than everybody thinks. Because there are people that think they're laborers in the harvest, and they're out there preaching the gospel and making everybody, each convert, twofold more of the children of hell than themselves. But that's not actually helping. So reality is we have to get a little further along. And we have to get into the presence of true oppression, probably before this is going to start to work in the way that God intends it to work, and it will. But all the walls of untempered mortar have to fall before you can build the true walls, like Nehemiah and Zerubbabel were doing, building the temple and the walls of the city. So now we've got all kinds of higgledy-piggledy, walls of untempered mortar that are just everywhere, and those have to fall down. And in the process of those falling down, that's where the gold is. That's where people are going to actually stand up and help each other in this circumstance and be godly, as it says in Matthew 5-7 and Galatians 5, and et cetera, et cetera. There has to be that time and that moment in which we start doing what God wants us to do. And, if you're expecting a sign, you're expecting wonders and healings and all that kind of stuff, right, left, and center, you're really confused about where you are and what's going on. So we need to build the city. We need to build the church properly. But that's a one-person occupation. It's a one person doing something for someone else and with someone else, not being over them, not being their minister or whatever. It's us helping each other stand up one by one, and to stand upright individually, and to a certain degree at this time collectively, but not so much. It's an individual effort. In the end time, it's individual efforts with individual people doing individual things that is going to make the big difference. That's all there is to it. If you're expecting something else, you're confused. Yes, there are going to be group efforts to a certain degree, but if you're counting on that, you're going to be disappointed. Because the group efforts are going to be individuals helping each other. And that's just all there is to it. So expect that it will be somewhat like it is here, where each individual person had their individual spot to stand on the wall and their individual section of the wall that they had to build. And yes, it was a group effort. And yes, absolutely, it is a group effort in the end time with God's people doing what he wants them to do. But we have to stand up individually and do the things that he wants us to do individually of our own recognizance, judging the things that God wants done and doing them ourselves. And if you expect that you're going to have, your captain of whatever and your captain of 50 and hundreds and thousands and whatever, and that people are going to tell you what to do, you're really, really confused because that's not how it's going to be. The character that God's people have earned and will earn in the end time is what determines what they're going to do, and their understanding of God's judgment and their understanding of how we judge righteously and how we judge righteous judgment, as Paul said. That's an individual circumstance, and that's an individual challenge, and that's an individual path that we all have to tread. And it's not going to be changed greatly for any single individual person, except when they run into that prophet, or when they run into the first of the two witnesses who measures the temple of God. So know that it's going to be an interesting time. And it's left to you to judge righteous judgment and to know what that is, and to know how to be one with God in anything. That might be a little hard to take, but reality is that's how it is. So deal with it. Okay. Verse 19. Moreover, the porters, Achab and Talmon, and their brethren that kept the gates, were 172. And the residue of Israel, of the priests and the Levites, that were in all the cities of Judah, every one in his inheritance. So we had Jerusalem, and the people that were there were mostly involuntary. They had to defend the city also. I didn't really say anything about that, but they also had to defend the city. There was a reason that those people needed to be there, and that was to prevent the people around from just going in and destroying the city again. Remember, they were building the walls, and everybody had his spear or his sword, and they worked in that fashion. And pretty much everybody was doing that everywhere around. But somebody had to be in Jerusalem, and most people did not really want to be there because of all the problems associated at that time. Okay, verse 20. And the residue of Israel, the priests and the Levites, were in all the cities of Judah, everyone in his inheritance. So everybody knew what their inheritance was. It had been 70 years they had been in Babylon. There were men that were alive that knew where their inheritances were. There were lots of people who knew what the deal was. And most of the people, the 5% of Israel or Judah and Benjamin that came back, they were more connected than most of the other people. And they knew where their inheritances were. They knew what land they were supposed to go to. There were still markings and everything, at the corners of the properties, and they knew about all of these things and how they were designed and how they worked. So, not a big surprise that everybody had an inheritance. It was just really thin. There weren't that many people. 5%, 40,000 people were all that came back. There were some there, but not many. And, most of the people that were there were from Zerubbabel and from, dealing with the rebuilding of the temple. So it was limited. It was really limited. Verse 21, but the Nethinims dwelt in Ophel, and Zihah and Gispa were over the Nethinims. And you can get all weird about that if you want. Go bother yourself. I don't care. Verse 22, the overseer also of the Levites at Jerusalem was Uzziah, the son of Bani, the son of Hashabiah, the son of Mattaniah, the son of Micah, the sons of Asaph. The singers were over the business of the house of God. You know who Asaph is. I mean, who doesn't know who Asaph is? He wrote maybe not most, but a lot of the Psalms with David, or after David more. For it was the king's commandment concerning them that a certain portion should be for the singers due for every day. So the singers had a job, which was to sing, and then they also dealt with some of the business of the house of God. And I don't know exactly which things those were off the top of my head. You probably look it up and you might be able to find something, although it's probably just a bunch of Jewish. Oh, well, it had to be this because, and it might be right, maybe. Who knows? Verse 23. For it was the king's commandment concerning them that a certain portion should be for the singers due for every day. Why did the king say this? Because it wasn't in the law. The singers weren't, just singing wasn't a portion, as far as I remember, in God's law. There were always singers. A lot of the Levites were singers. There were always singers in God's temple. But my suspicion was that there were so few people there then that they needed more singers and they didn't have them. So the king said, all right, well, let's make sure that we have enough singers here that we actually don't sound like a 4-person chorale. I mean, it's a problem. You've only got 284 Levites. How many singers could they actually have had? And probably not a lot. Verse 24, and Pethahiah, the son of Meshazabeel, of the children of Zerah, of the sons of Judah, was at the king's hand in all matters concerning the people. So we have I don't really have a name for that. There's some English words from England that people might sort of recognize, but the reality is this guy was an administrator. He was an administrator that helped the king with all kinds of things. That's the best word for it. Verse 25, and for the villages with their fields, some of the children of Judah dwelt at Kirjatharba, in the villages thereof, and at Dibon, at the villages thereof, and at Jekabzeel, and the villages thereof, and at Jeshua, and Molada, and Beth-Phelet, and at Hazarshual, and Beersheba, and in the villages thereof, and at Ziklag, and Machonah, in the villages thereof, and at En-Rimmon, and at Zerah, and at Jarmuth, and Zenoah, and Adullam, love Adullam, and in their villages at Lachish, and the fields thereof, at Azekah, and in the villages thereof, and they dwelt from Beersheba unto the valley of Hinnom. So basically we're talking about the locations of certain people and the administration thereof. The children also of Benjamin from Geba dwelt at Michmash, and Aijah, and Bethel, and in their villages, and at Anathoth, Nob, Ananiah, and Hazor, Ramah, and Gittaim, Hadid, Zeboim, Nebalat, Lod, and Ono in the valley of craftsmen. And the Levites were in divisions in Judah and Benjamin. So that valley of craftsmen, those are the people who built the temple, essentially, or built the things that were in the temple. They built tiles, and they cast the brass, and they did all kinds of crazy things in that valley of craftsmen. It was kind of an interesting place. And God blessed them specifically to do the things that they did. Chapter 12. Now these are the priests and the Levites that went up with Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Joshua, Sariah, Jeremiah, and Ezra. So these people that you see right here in this sentence, this verse, wow, that's the big guns. That's the big guns. Those are the people who rebuilt the temple. And we can go over that some other time. A lot of mention of them in the book of Zechariah. Verse 2, Amariah, and Maluk, and Hattush, and Shechaniah, and Rehum, and Meremoth, Iddo, and Genotha, and Abijah, and Miamin, and Mediah, and Bilgah, and Shemaiah, and Joiarib, and Jediah, Sallu, and Amok, and Hilkiah, Jediah. These were the chief of the priests and of their brethren in the days of Joshua. Moreover, and that's a big deal. I mean, that's a big deal. These people were the people who were in charge of basically everything. These are all of the most important government figures, because when you look at God's plan for things, you look at God's administration of things, you look at God's government of things, it always gets down to basically one single pathway for everything. You have the temple of God, and you have the priesthood, and everything goes out from there. And there is nothing else. So you want to look at the government of God, that's how it works. Is that how it works now? But the reality of it is that that's how it's supposed to work. And it's really, really important that you recognize that it all starts with the Father in the Holy of Holies, goes out to the Messiah, who is the front part of the temple that sticks up 255 feet above everything else. And then you have the two witnesses right in front of that, stick up about 54 feet in their little brass candlesticks with fire on top. That was they were the light in the inside of the temple in large part. Outside the temple, not inside the Holy of Holies, but everything that was inside the temple was either the Father or the Son, and the two witnesses are right there on the front of the temple, lighting up the inner court. And then you have the inner court, and then you have the outer court, and then you have the city walls, and then you have the rest of the city, and that's it. That's how God's government works, is everything from the inside of the Holy of Holies just goes out from there. What were the priests responsible for? Everything. They were the government officials. They were the police. They were basically everything. The priests administered everything. Everybody's behavior, in the end, came back to the priests. And the priest said, do this or do that or do the other thing according to what God intended. And they made decisions on their own recognizance to do the things that they were supposed to do based upon their training, based upon their connection to the temple. And it all got back to the high priest. And from there, it got back to the Holy of Holies and to the Father. So the connection in all of these things, everything was directly connected. Now, what's directly connected now in our time? Basically nothing. None of these connections remain. So I'm not saying that they aren't there spiritually, because in certain cases they are. But mostly, it's each individual praying to God, and that's their connection to God. And if you think that you're going to get your connection to God through your minister, you're very, very, very confused. Because God's temple has not been built. In the end time, his temple has not been built. And the connections that you see, all the connections that I just spoke about, are not there. You can say, oh, well, they're spiritually there. Oh, well, blah, blah, blah. And you can go on and on and on. But again, just like I said in the last message, it's really, really obvious that this is not the case, because the men who are doing the things that they should be doing differently aren't doing them differently. And God's not in it. They're walls of untempered mortar. So we have this problem where the people are trying to connect to the ministry, or the priesthood, if you will, and the not priesthood is connecting to the people as much as they possibly can to get their hand in their pocket. And what's the actuality of it? The connections back to the Holy of Holies are broken. We have the blind leading the blind. And just because you're blind, or even blind leading the blind, doesn't necessarily mean that you are dead. If time continues and you remain blind, then you will be dead because you will fall in one pit or another, one trap or another. That's how it is. But the baseline behavior of basically everyone in the end time is blindness and sleepiness. So there are those that are asleep, and there are those that are blind, and there's those that are blind and asleep, and you're some quantity of one or the other of those, either asleep or blind. And almost everyone is a little bit of both, and a lot of one or the other or both. So this is the reality. It's been 2,000 years since God did something dramatic on the planet. And in the end time, it's all drama, people. It's all drama, man. There's life and death going on everywhere. So there has to be this point at which people prop their eyelids open, which mine naturally seem to close horribly, but it is what it is. We have to prop our eyelids open a bit and wake up, and we have to pull the blinders off so we can see a little bit, so that we actually get an idea of what's going on around us. And in reality, the only thing we can do is start to clean the inside of our cup. And once we get to the point where there's not so much nastiness on the inside of our cup that we can actually see a little bit, then we can help our brothers around us, not by condemning them, but by trying to help them wake up a little bit and get their heads out of the sand. And then at some point, we'll be able to stand up as pillars. But the reality of this whole circumstance is it's not going to work in the same way it did in Nehemiah's time. Yes, there will be connections to God. The first of the two witnesses shows up in the end time and does all these things that most people don't even have a clue about, measuring the temple of God, doing a whole variety of things for God and for his purposes. But the reality is you're not going to be able to crawl in his pocket either. A, because he's not going to want you in his pocket, and B, because that's not how it's going to work. And the disbelief is so dramatic, and the eyeballs are so closed, and the blindness is so great, that that's not going to happen in a way that you might suspect either. So reality is you have to stand up and start behaving like Christ on your own. Period. Flat out, period. That's all there is to it. What's going to stimulate you to do this? Oppression. When people get right in your face and they start spitting on you because you're a Christian, and you have to stand up and say, you know what? I'm a Christian. Spit on me all you want. Don't care. When your faith actually has to show, that's when you become a pillar. When the resistance grows. Sorry about that. I didn't turn on my airplane mode. When the resistance grows to the point that you will be washed away if you do not stand for God, that's what you have to do. You don't need to go around brown-nosing anybody. If you're doing that now, better stop. It's not going to help anything. Just because you're in good with your minister, that's a bad thing. Oh, there's so many things I could tell you. But it's neither the place nor the time for those things. The reality is that you have to stand on your own. Just like they did when they were building the wall. Every man had their spear in their hand. Ours is not a violent thing. Ours is entirely a non-violent thing. Resist not evil. If you don't know what that means, there's another message on YouTube that you should look at. Is that one hard to swallow? Yeah, really, really hard to swallow for almost anybody, for almost any reason. but it's there for a reason, in a particular time, for a particular purpose. We have to stand up against resistance. When they were building the walls of the city, was there resistance? They didn't actually run into much. But if they hadn't been on the walls repelling the few people that came at them on a regular basis, there would have been a lot of people that took them over and killed them as quickly as they could. They had to be on the walls. They had to be covered in the armor of God, the whole armor of God, doing what they were supposed to do. And it's the same exact circumstance. That is for you. The reality is that you don't have a big administration behind you. You don't have a whole bunch of Levites. You don't have the priesthood. You don't have a whole bunch of people on your side that you should have on your side. Why did God design it this way? Why did God make it this way? To test you and to try you. And to make sure that you are one of those faithful. How do you tell that somebody's loyal and faithful? Gangsters all know how to tell if someone's loyal and faithful. Gangsters? What's he talking about? The reality is that everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants the same thing. They want people around them that are loyal and that will do what you ask them to do, not complain, and be loyal and faithful. It's not just God. It's gangsters. It's governments. It's everybody. That's what everybody wants. That's what everybody's trying to get, is people who are loyal and faithful and who will do what they're told. This shouldn't be a big mystery to you. You should understand this. What's important is where you put your loyalty to the creator of everything, who does everything and made everything and is going to continue doing his own thing forever in a good way that's helpful to everyone. Or to somebody who's going to do what gangsters do to their people, regardless of whether they're loyal or not. Whose mercy do you want? Do you want a gangster's mercy? Do you want a government's mercy? Or do you want God's mercy? You see, he's got something really good, where everybody else just has the pain of slavery, of horrible slavery. God's got something good. Everybody else, what have they got? They want you to get your nose to the grindstone and work for them constantly, no matter what. With God, it's a little bit the same way, but his burden is light. And the reward, in the end, to live forever in peace and harmony. And God giving us every good thing. The wonder of the trees of life. And the wonder of his kingdom. Eye has not seen nor ear heard. God can give us every wonderful thing. What can anyone else give you? Not much of anything. Maybe some money, maybe some, status. Oh, you're a big gangster. Oh, everybody's afraid of you. Whether it's government or not, maybe you're a colonel in the military. Maybe you're a this or that and you have some status. Okay. Does any of it even slightly compare to what God and who God is? Not even close. So, what are you guaranteed if you follow God in the end time? While you're human, it's pain, misery, death, and some really cool things like God's Spirit, the Comforter, brothers, etc. But pain, misery, and death are all included. That's just part of the package. It's after that everything is really, really good. And what can anybody else guarantee you? Pain, misery, and death, and the pleasures of sin for a season. And that's all they got. Once you're dead, man, you go on a lake of fire. Bye-bye. In this life or the next, God's deal is still way better. It's just that much better. If you don't agree with me, fine, do what you want. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. And they get resurrected and sent to the permanent death. After watching a video of how terribly, awfully you managed things. I think it's better to be one of these guys. One of the ones faithful to God that stood as pillars back then and forever. I think it's better. This is why what I say matter to you? Might not. Take your pick. Where was I? I have a mass of names. I think I was in verse 9, but I'm not sure. Also Bakbukiah and Unai, their brethren, were over against them in the watches, and Joshua begat Joachim, and Joachim also begat Eliashib, and Eliashib begat Joiada, and Joiada begat Jonathan, and Jonathan begat Jaddua. In the days of Joachim were priests the chief of the fathers of Sariah, Moriah, and of Jeremiah, Hananiah, of Ezra, Meshullam, of Amariah, and Jehohanan, and of Meliku, Jonathan, of Shebaniah, Joseph, and of Haram, Adnah, and Marioth, and Helkai, and of Edo, Zechariah, of Ginnethon, Meshullam. Okay. Oh, of Ginnethon, Meshullam, and of Abijah, Zechariah, and of Menaim, of Modiah, Piltai, and of Bilgah, Shemua, and of Shemaiah, Jehonathan, and of Joyrib, Madani, of Jediah, Uzai, and of Salai, Kalai, of Amok, Eber, or Heber, if you will, of Hilkiah, Hashabiah, of Jediah, Nethaniel. So, the administrators, the chief Levites. The Levites of the day of Eliashib, Joiada, and Johanan, and Jaddua were recorded chief of the fathers, also the priests to the reign of Darius the Persian. The sons of Levi, the chief of the fathers, were written in the book of the Chronicles, even until the days of Johanan the son of Eliashib. And of the chief of the Levites, Hashabiah, and Sherebiah, and Joshua, the son of Kadmiel, with their brethren over against them, to praise and to give thanks according to the commandment of David, the man of God, warred over against war. The commandment of David, the man of God. Madaniah and Bakbukiah, Obadiah and Meshullam, Talmon, Akab were porters keeping the ward at the thresholds of the gates. Verse 26, these were the days of Joachim, the son of Joshua, the son of Josedek, and in the days of Nehemiah the governor, and of Ezra the priest, the scribe. The important folks. God wrote them in this book. This is the little book. This isn't the big book, and it's not the book of life, and it's not a variety of other books that God has. If you get recorded in this little book, you were doing pretty well. Doing really well, in fact, before God. Or really badly. Dedication of the wall. So, verse 27, on the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites out of all their places to bring them to Jerusalem, to keep the dedication with gladness, both with thanksgivings and with singing, with cymbals, psalteries, and with harps. So, this dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, important. And we're going to have something similar in the end time. Not sure when or where. But the reality of it is that we have to build a wall. What is a wall? For? What's the purpose of the wall of Jerusalem? To defend the city. And the reality of it is that the only way we defend the city in the end time is to defend its name before God and in many cases die as martyrs defending the wall. Is this physical death? One where we're fighting with weapons and stuff? No, it's not. It's a defense of our God and of our people in the eyes of the world, just as it was in that time. But we're not out there with guns trying to kill people and keep them off of a bunch of stones. We are the stones, and we're supposed to stand up as pillars, defending with our mouths and with God's judgment and with God's Spirit our behavior, which should be upright. And Galatians 5:21-ish, the good stuff. I think I have the right verse. That's where we're supposed to be. And if we're not doing that, what do we do? At some point, this dedication of God's people to their purpose will occur. It'll be different than we probably can imagine, but these kind of things will occur in the end time. Absolutely. God has stated a lot of the things that are going to happen. Before the earth can truly be hurt, God's servants have to be marked in their foreheads. They have to be set aside. And it's important. Why? Because when the destruction of God's people comes, he says very clearly, don't hurt any man upon whom is the mark. If you're faithful properly and do what you're supposed to in the end time, in this circumstance, in Babylon, in America, at the destruction of the various messed up houses of God, you might not be destroyed. But you're going to have to do it right. You're going to have to stand up at the right time and do what God says. Does that mean you're not going to be miserable or unhappy or bad things aren't going to happen to you? No, that's not what it means at all. It means you'll survive. People around you, some of them might. Reality is some people are wheat and some people are chaff. Do you have any control over that? How can you control even a little teeny bit what happens to people around you? How can you control that? Very scarcely. Not easily. And what do you have to do that? And the reality is it's the opposite of what everybody does to try and protect their people. Everybody tries to protect their people by defending them with guns or with fists or with words or with whatever. They try to defend their people. They try to find a place to hide. They try to survive in a survivalist environment. They try to prep. They try to do everything they can possibly do to save their children or their wife or their husband or their family. They do whatever they can, humanly. And that won't work in the end time. It would never work. But in the end time, it particularly won't work because everything is going to be destroyed. You know, all the elements burn up in a fervent heat, mountains melting like wax. You can't save anyone that way. Can't do it. How can you influence the people around you in a good way so that they might behave like wheat instead of like chaff? You have to act just like the Messiah. You have to be like him. You have to stand up as a pillar, doing things as best you can possibly do before God so that someone sees your example and follows it. That's the only way you can have a positive influence on the people around you. The only way that you might help save someone else. How do I know this? Because God was really clear about it. Though Noah, Job, and Daniel were here in this moment, they would save neither son nor daughter, wife. I'm getting it all wrong. But the point is, the three most righteous men ever described in the Bible, except for John the Baptist, who still hadn't been born yet, if they were alive, they could save neither son nor daughter, wife or father or mother or anyone. By their righteousness, they could not do anything to save anyone except influence the people around us correctly. That's the only power you have at all to save the people around you. You want them to make the right decisions. You want them to be in God's kingdom. That's the only thing you can do. It's the only thing anyone could ever do. Because trying to protect them any other way not only won't work, but it'll almost, in many cases, guarantee their lack of success. You want people to survive in your family that are, sort of here and there and back and forth and you don't know what they're going to do. One of the things you should tell them is when the armies enter this country and when they're standing on American soil and killing everybody in sight, tell them to get down on both knees and pray to God and admit their sin. Do that. And some of those people will be hauled off and be in slavery for a while, but they'll come back to Jerusalem. And tell them if they ever get the opportunity, go back to Jerusalem, because if they stay wherever they get hauled off to be in slavery to, they will die if they don't come back to Jerusalem. Now, I'm not backing this up with a whole bunch of scriptures because I didn't prepare that. But the reality of it is that all those things that I've just said are all based upon scriptures that are extremely important in the end time. You want to keep somebody alive, be a good example, and explain what has to happen at the final moment before the beast destroys this country. If they're not willing to do anything else, they have to be willing to admit their sin and get down on their knees before a foreign army that otherwise will kill them. Sound good? Not to anybody normal. It sounds horrible, but that's the reality of the circumstance. You either stand up as a pillar and overcome and do what you're supposed to, or at the very least, lowest bar, admit your sin and bow down to the enemy when they come. Those are your two choices in the end time in America. Is what it is. Let's continue on. I'll read 27 again. And the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites out of all their places to bring them to Jerusalem, to give the dedication with gladness, both with thanksgivings and with singing, with psalms, with psalteries, and with harps. When is this going to happen? Not until we get back to Jerusalem. All this gladness and thanksgiving and all that stuff doesn't happen until we get back to Jerusalem. America dies. God's people leave. A lot of God's people get taken into captivity as slaves. And when we all get back together in Jerusalem, guess what? It's going to be a big party. It's going to be beautiful. God's going to be there. It's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. Verse 28, the sons of the singers gathered themselves together, both out of the plain country round about Jerusalem. Excuse me. And from the villages of Netophathi. Tophathi? Have to look that up, see what the deal is with that. It's kind of interesting. Also in the house of Gilgal, and out of the fields of Geba and Asmaveth, for the singers had builded them villages round about Jerusalem. So apparently the singers, there were a lot of them, built villages around Jerusalem. There was a culture. Obviously, I'm saying this based upon just looking at the scripture. There was a culture of singing right there. So something was going around, going on in a different way than what we're used to. I guess you can say Broadway or, even Hollywood, kind of, not with all those perversions, but the idea of artists getting together in these villages is kind of what's going on. And they were singers, and they were singing praises probably to God. They probably had a lot of Babylonian stuff going on too, unfortunately, but artists do to get together in various places, I guess. Verse 30, and the priests and the Levites purified themselves and purified the people and the gates and the wall. And then we get to the procedures of the temple. Verse 31, then I brought up the princes of Judah upon the wall and appointed 2 great companies of them that gave thanks, whereof one went on the right hand upon the wall toward the dung gate. And after them went Hoshea and the half of the princes of Judah, and Azariah and Ezra and Meshullam, Judah and Benjamin and Shemaiah and Jeremiah. 2 great companies of them that gave thanks. Pretty cool. Verse 35, and certain of the priests' sons with trumpets, namely Zechariah, the son of Jonathan, the son of Shemaiah, the son of Mattaniah, the son of Micaiah, the son of Zachar, the son of Asaph, and his brethren Shemaiah and Azarel, Milalai, Gilalai, and Maiah, and Nethaniel, and Judah, and Hanani, with the musical instruments of David, the man of God, and Ezra the scribe before them. And the fountain gate, which was over against them, they went up by the stairs of the city of David, at the going up of the wall, above the house of David, even unto the water gate eastward. Good deal. And the company of them that gave thanks went over against them, and I after them, and the half of the people upon the wall, from beyond the tower of the furnaces, even unto the broad wall. Interesting that Nehemiah inserts himself there. And I after them. And from above the gate of Ephraim, and above the old gate, and above the fish gate, and the tower of Hananiel, and the tower of Mea, even under the sheep gate, they stood still in the prison gate. The reason I say it's interesting because it's not common. It's very unusual for one of the writers of the Bible to insert themselves in a personal pronoun, not a description. So most of the personal pronouns you find in the Bible virtually always are he, she, it. Very rarely does someone say, I stood here, I stood there. And it's very specific circumstances a lot of times. Not sure there's any particular specific reason this stands out, but the fact that it's there makes my bell ring a little bit. 39, and from above the gate of Ephraim, and above the old gate, and above the fish gate, the tower of Hananiel, and the tower of Mea, I already read this, and even under the sheep gate, they stood still in the prison gate. So stood the 2 companies of them that gave thanks in the house of God, and I and half of the rulers with me. So everybody got together, everybody important, everybody, just wah, and everybody gave thanks. And the priests, Eliakim, Messiah, Miniamin, Micaiah, Elionai, Zechariah, and Hananiah with trumpets, and Messiah, and Shemaiah, and Eleazar, and Uzai, and Jehohanan, and Malchijah, and Elam, and Ezer. And the singers sang loud with Jezrahiah, over their overseer. So the conductor was Jezrahiah. Also, the day after they offered great sacrifices and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The wives also and the children rejoiced, so that the joy of Jerusalem was heard even afar off. Jerusalem's on a hill. It's on a mountain. It's a hill on a mountain. It's a hill on a large ridge. Why does God describe this way? Why did he do this? Because he did this. And again, it was joy and rejoicing in God then, and it's a shadow of things to come in the future for us who are alive now in this moment. And at that time were some appointed over the chambers for the treasures, for the offerings, for the firstfruits, and for the tithes, to gather them into them out of the fields of the cities, the portions of the law for the priests and Levites, for Judah rejoiced for the priests and for the Levites that waited. And again, because it mentions it again, it's a waste of time to give your tithes and your offerings to someone who is not directly connected to God. And you know, because I told you before, why they're not directly connected to God. Because they're building a wall of untempered mortar. And they look for converts to make them twofold more the child of hell than themselves. And if you think that's not right, better examine it clearly. You better think about it. Better talk about it in your head. And you better figure out what it is that God's doing. Because I promise you, he's not doing this. He's not putting himself into this temple that they're building that is not his. It is not his house. It's just a polyglot structure that somebody's putting up here and there, dedicating it to God and expecting that God's going to live there. There's nothing in the Bible that tells you that that's going to happen. Is that disappointing? Yeah. Is it sad? Yeah. Is it a little harsh? Yeah. But our behavior is not what it should be. And because we have not done what God wanted us to do all the way along, all the way throughout time, except in very, very small circumstances, we end up reaping the whirlwind in the end time. Is there anything that you read in the Bible that says that it's going to be easy and fun in the end time? The reason I said that is because I don't care what anybody tells you. There's nothing that says it's going to be easy and fun in the Bible. There is going to be a rapture at the last trumpet. After all the other trumpets in Revelation, at the last one, when everything's almost done, when everything is essentially done, that's when there's a rapture. To get to that point, you got to go through everything in between. To the point where God says that a man shall be as valuable as the golden wedge of Ophir, because there are so few left. We're going to go from 10 billion people down to, who knows, a few million, maybe even, after Armageddon. You know, I had somebody at the feast this year tell me, well, God's not just going to kill everybody. That's not what he's trying to do. I said, no, he's not trying to kill everybody. But there's one little trumpet in there, or seal, or one of the things, I can't remember which it is, that he kills 25% of the whole world. One little seal or trumpet. I don't remember which one it is. One of the early ones. I think it's a seal. And then at Armageddon, 200 million people at one time. And he's killing them intentionally because they're evil and they're coming to destroy him. Is there anything that you've read in the end time that makes you think it's going to be easy? Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. It's a time of great faith. It's a time of great fear. It's a time of great death. It's a time of great righteousness. It's a time of great mercy where God's concerned. How can it be mercy when he's killing all those people and he's allowing them all to die and he's allowing them to kill each other? And, look at all those trumpets and look at all those seals and look at all those woes. He's just killing people right, left, and center. And yet it's the time of the greatest mercy on the whole planet. You better figure out where you stand. You better think about these things and what you're going to do at the end. Because what happens at the end? Bam! It ends. I wish that I could get that through to people. I wish that I could get them to understand that it's going to end. And that God has the judgment to know how to deal with everyone when he ends this thing. Whether they're children, whether they're adults, whether they're sinners, or whether they're, in some part righteous. I won't say righteous. God knows how to deal with it. He knew how to deal with David's firstborn. And I'm not talking about Solomon. David's firstborn child of Bathsheba. He knows how to deal with him. For a minute, just stop and think about that for a second. David's first child from Bathsheba died. God killed him. Well, he didn't get to grow up and have a whole life. Can God fix that situation? Can God judge that situation and fix it? The answer is yes. Why didn't God let that child live? There's so many reasons. There's so many reasons that he didn't allow that child to live. I can't even begin to name them all off the top of my head, but I'll tell you some of them right now. Because if that child had lived, he would have been like Solomon. And that would have been a huge problem. That would have been a massive problem. Because he would have been a child of adultery that sat upon the throne of God. And God wasn't going to allow that. And if he did let him grow up, and he chose Solomon instead, what would the dynamic have been? And the reality is that it was too difficult. It was too difficult a circumstance for David and everyone else. It was impossible for God to get what he needed out of that circumstance and out of Solomon and out of David and out of everyone else. It was impossible. So he killed him. Because then God could save him. And he couldn't make the king of Israel that built the temple of God a child of adultery. He couldn't do it. What message would that send? And I know that I'm saying this, and that there's probably not 5 people on the entire planet that have ever even considered these things. But these things are important. God killed that child for a reason, for a number of reasons. A lot more reasons than I'm saying right now. but these are the main ones. It's important that we do what's right in God's sight. It's important that we follow Him so that we don't have to deal with circumstances like this. Because David could have done that differently. And it could have worked out without David's firstborn child of Bathsheba dying. You don't want your kids to die? Be the best possible example you can be. Do it as rightly as you possibly can before God. You can't save them, but you might influence them enough that God might draw them to Him. This is the only influence you have. Use it. Do it as well as you possibly can. Clean the inside of your cup. And other people will see that the inside of your cup is clean. And some will turn away, and some will turn towards you. And some will turn away and then turn towards you. But this is the only way that you can influence people around you in a good way, that they might enter the kingdom of God. It's the only way. There is no other way that you can save someone else. There has never been another way to save someone else, truly. Keep going. Verse 45. And both the singers and the porters kept the word of their God and the word of the purification, according to the commandment of David and of Solomon his son. I didn't even read this today, but the Solomon thing came out. For in the days of David and Asaph, of old, there were chief of the singers and songs of praise and thanksgiving unto God. And all Israel in the days of Zerubbabel and in the days of Nehemiah gave the portions of the singers and the porters every day his portion, and they sanctified holy things unto the Levites, and the Levites sanctified them unto the children of Aaron. Something was done differently than it had been before. God accepted it. And it was good. Let's read chapter 13. Foreigners excluded. On that day they read in the book of Moses in the audience of the people, and therein was found written that the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of God forever. Whoa. That's some tough stuff. Because they met not the children of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them, that he should curse them. Howbeit our God turned the curse into a blessing. Right here. Really important that you understand what's going on. God's perspective is different than everybody else's. The Ammonites and the Moabites didn't really get most of their land stolen. Part of it, I say stolen, but taken by God and by God's people. God was the giver of that land, period. And he gave it to Israel. And some of the Moabites' land and some of the Ammonites' land was given to them, but they could have scooted over and been fine. The reality is they didn't give a rat's tail end about God. They just knew that they were being oppressed. If they had met God's people with joy. Because let's face it, they were brothers. They were brothers. These people knew who they were. They knew exactly who they were. We were 500 years away, but they still knew who they were. Because the world was a lot smaller back then. It was a lot smaller. And everybody knew where everybody was from and who they were. You know? Jacob and Esau. They knew. And instead, they tried to kill their brothers instead of welcoming them back. They also knew the prophecies. They knew about these things because it wasn't hidden. These things weren't hidden away. They weren't hidden away. Whether it was Abraham or whether it was Isaac or Jacob, those prophecies were known by everyone around them, by their kids and by their cousins and by their brothers, and everybody around knew all of those things. You think all the things that God did with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were just like completely hidden? Don't be a nitwit. They were known. Lot knew. Really clearly knew. Everybody knew what the story was. There weren't 10 billion people on the planet. And they knew that they went down to Egypt and that suddenly they were coming back. And they knew that they'd been out in an uninhabitable desert where 3 million, 2 million people, however many people there were of Israel at that time, couldn't survive out there. They couldn't do it. Everybody knew that you couldn't survive out there with 10,000 people, much less a couple of million. You'd be lucky to have 100 people wandering around together and surviving from spring to spring at exactly the right time so that there was water for your livestock. How many people are out there now? Nobody. Very few people, and they got wells. I mean, they're getting water consistently from somewhere. They knew these people wandered around out in the middle of the desert for 40 years. They knew it. And suddenly they came out of the desert and they're like, oh shit, we're in big trouble. And instead of saying, welcome here, they said, no, get out of here. We're going to get Balaam to curse you. Story of Balaam. So many things to be learned from that story. Because they met not the children of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them, that he should curse them. Howbeit our God turned the curse into a blessing. You got to look at it honestly and openly. In verse 2, about Balaam. They hired Balaam to curse God's people. And by the skin of Balaam's chinny chin chin, God prevented him from cursing them and turned it into a blessing. Now it came to pass, when they had heard the law, that they separated from Israel all the mixed multitude. Why? First thing you got to do is examine this and say, oh, wow, the mixed multitude. That means wives and husbands were separated, fathers and children were separated, mothers and children were separated. This was a big deal. This was a painful problem. And yet they did it. Why? Because God didn't want his people mixed in with people that he didn't like particularly. And this has been a problem for the whole world ever since. You think you're God's chosen people and you don't like us because we're not God's chosen people. Well, it's not the people of God's choosing that are causing the problem, it's God. God chooses whom he will. And in this time, it did not include a whole lot of people, and they were only working on a physical level. So they were separated. And we're working on an entirely different level. We're physical still, but we're dealing on a more spiritual level because of a whole lot of things that have gone in between. Messiah coming and a whole lot of things like that. Spiritually, what's the difference in the end time? There is no difference. Except it doesn't matter whether you're heathen, pagan, of pagan heathen origin or not. What matters is you wheat or is you chaff? Don't care what your origin was. I don't care what your bloodline says it was. Are you chaff or are you wheat? And if you're wheat, God's good with you. How many generations has it been since this time? Hundreds. How long did it take for the generations to clean themselves up? If you're a Moabite, 3 generations, you could become an Israelite. If you're an Ammonite, 10 generations. A lot longer. We're in the hundreds of generations since this time, so maybe not hundreds, whatever it is. Reality is, it's been a lot of generations. And God said, eat, Peter, eat. And it's okay if you're a Gentile. You can be grafted in to Israel. The question is, are you Israel? And if you're an Israelite, and you can't prove that either way, one way or the other, are you wheat? Or are you chaff? Are you a sheep? Beep, beep, I'm a sheep. Are you a sheep or are you a goat? Because that's what happens in the end times, the separation of the sheep and the goats. And the separation of the wheat and the chaff. And it doesn't matter what your true origin is, genetically speaking. Doesn't matter. What does matter is whether you is wheat or you is chaff. Because God saves the wheat and burns up the chaff in eternal fire. They were separated then, physically from family to family. They were separated. What's going to happen now in the end time? Same separation on an entirely different level. Oof. Death's going to be involved. Do the best you can so that those around you don't die. Now it came to pass when they had heard the law that they separated from Israel all the mixed multitude. And in the end time, God's not leaving it up to us to separate ourselves, except for individually. He's going to make the separation. Read Ezekiel 2. Read Ezekiel 3. Read a whole variety of things in the Bible about sheep and goats and harvests and this and that and the other thing. Ugh. Verse 4. And before this, Eliashib the priest, having the oversight of the chamber of the house of our God, was allied unto Tobiah. And he had prepared for him a great chamber where aforetime they laid the food offerings and the frankincense and the vessels and the tithes of corn and new wine and the oil which was commanded to be given to the Levites and the singers and the porters and the offerings of the priests. But in all this time was not I at Jerusalem. Nehemiah is like, I wasn't there at Jerusalem when they did all this stuff. Because Zerubbabel came and Joshua came back at a different time and built the temple prior to Nehemiah arriving. But I was not in Jerusalem at this time, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, came I unto the king, and after certain days I obtained leave of the king. And I came to Jerusalem, and understood of the evil that Eliashib did for Tobiah, in preparing him a chamber in the courts of the house of God. Tobiah was not God's king at that time. He shouldn't have been in there. Period. At all. What happens when somebody barges into God's house who's not God's? Remember the wedding supper? That whole business? Guy doesn't have his wedding garment on? I never knew you. Weeping and gnashing of teeth. And it grieved me sore. Therefore I cast forth all the household stuff of Tobiah out of the chamber. Took his crap, pitched it. Then I commanded, and they cleansed the chambers, and there brought I again the vessels of the house of God with the food offering and the frankincense. He was occupying the place where God's sacrifices were supposed to be stored. Really? Do you want to invite yourself into God's house when God didn't ask you to be there? Yeesh. Such things are the things that Satan does, and other things like it. Verse 10, and I perceived that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, for the Levites and the singers that did the work were fled, everyone to his field. Well, let's rebuild all this stuff, but hold on a second. You didn't feed the Levites? They're all having to make their own money off their own property, even though we read the whole thing and everybody was supposed to be doing what they're supposed to, only somebody was hijacking it. Tobiah and friends. Then I contended with the rulers and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place. Really? Nehemiah was some gutsy character. Pretty hard to do that in any circumstance, anywhere, with men. You think that's not going to happen in the end time? You better think again, because it is. And what's our circumstance here? We've got a whole lot of blind preachers and ministers that are doing things that ought not to be done, just like there was in this circumstance. You think God's going to leave that alone the end time? You're so confused. Read Acts 3. Don't know who that prophet is, or why Moses prophesied of him in the end time. Ignorance of God's people is extreme. I'm not going to go into that subject in a big way here, but the reality of it is that God's going to fix all this. He's going to tear their hooves in pieces. You think the fat are going to survive in the end time? Mm-mm. Verse 11, then I contended with the rulers and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together and set them in their place. then brought all Judah the tithe of the corn and the new wine and the oil unto the treasuries. Nehemiah was not even there for a lot of this. He said, put this in order, and he sent a bunch of people to do it, and a bunch of the rulers, a bunch of the people that were supposed to be doing certain things, switched it around themselves and did things differently so that they could keep all that money and God's tithes. And you think God's not going to correct that? End time, that time, anytime, God puts his own house in order. And the people who are standing in the way of that are going to get flattened. It was nice and pleasant here in Nehemiah's time. Nehemiah set them in their place, but a lot gentler than the end time's going to be. Again, then brought all Judah the tithe of the corn and the new wine and the oil into the treasuries. And then the Levites, of which there were only 284 to start with, were actually fed properly so that they could actually stay and do what they needed to do instead of be working out in their fields all the time. You know, if the policemen aren't doing their job, and if the administrators aren't doing their job because they have to go scramble for food, guess what? Everybody suffers. Justice doesn't go forth. Things don't work right. People do whatever they want because the cop's not around to stop them. Verse 13, and I made treasurers over the treasuries. He took the people who were actually doing what they were supposed to, like Shemaiah and Zadok, and the others here, and he actually put them in charge of the money so that things went the way they were supposed to go. And I made treasurers over the treasuries. Shelemiah. No, is that Shemaiah? It's an I. It's an L. The priest and Zadok the scribe and the Levites, Pedaiah, and next to them was Hanan, the son of Zachor, the son of Mattaniah, for they were counted faithful, and their office was to distribute unto the brethren. Nehemiah put people there who weren't overly ambitious to steal the things of God. It's people that are overly ambitious to steal the things of God right now. Have you seen the TV? And what people do in the name of God? Think he's not paying attention or ignorant of all that? Oh, there's some pain that is going to come down. Boy, howdy. Remember me, O my God, concerning this, and wipe not out my good deeds that I have done for the house of God and for the offices thereof. Nehemiah wasn't perfect. He knew he was a sinner. He said, remember me, O God, because I'm trying to do this right. And in those days saw I in Judah some treading the presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves, and lading asses, and also wine and grapes and figs, and all manners of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I testified against them in the day wherein they sold victuals. They were buying and selling and bringing things in the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath. And God said, no, don't do that, ever. And what are we doing now? You think this isn't a problem in the end time? Big problem. Is the Sabbath still one of the 10 Commandments? It kind of is. Should we be keeping the 10 Commandments? Yeah, we kind of should. Are there reasons to do other things sometimes? Yeah. Should we be doing something else all the time just because we want to? Or it seems like the thing to do at the time because somebody said that the Catholics and Justinian did something back in the day, and maybe you should think about it and get it right. Sabbath was from creation. From creation. It's about creation and about what God did in creation. Is there something that you can say about that makes the Sabbath less than what it is? In faith, can you do something different? Yes, you can. But even in faith, we have to justify our actions before God in the judgment. You think you can justify your actions about the Sabbath? And you keep Sunday because there's a burden of sin here. If you can relieve yourself of some of the burdens of that sin, maybe you should. Is keeping the law going to keep you alive in God's kingdom? Or is it going to bring you into God's kingdom? No. A lot of times it helps if you get your behavior right and you have a little less sin holding you back. The law can't get you into God's kingdom. But neither can doing sin everywhere all the time for your own purposes. Faith gets you in God's kingdom. Sabbath. A lot of it's about faith. It's about believing that God is our creator. We could talk about that all year. There are lots of good reasons to keep the Sabbath and very, very few good reasons not to. There dwelt men of Tyre also therein, which brought in fish and all manner of wares, and sold on the Sabbath unto the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah and said unto them, what evil is this that you do and profane the Sabbath day? What are you doing, you morons? Did not your fathers thus, and did not your God bring all this evil upon us and upon this city, and yet you bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath? 70 years we've been like this. And you're going to go right back to this? What's wrong with you? That's what Nehemiah was heading for. And it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the gates should be shut and charged that they should not be opened until after the Sabbath. And some of my servants set I at the gates that there should be no burden brought in on the Sabbath day. Nehemiah's like, all right, my guards are going in there and the gates are going to be shut. And if you're outside, tough titty. You think this is going to be any different in the end time? Again, it's separating wheat from chaff and sheep from goats. And there are some people that will not be in God's kingdom because of the Sabbath. Is that the best reason not to be in God's kingdom? No, not really, but it's a reason. People choose whatever hill they want to die on. Your choice. Then I testified against them and said unto them, why do you lodge about the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. And from that time forth, they came no more on the Sabbath. They're like, oh, well, we can't get in the city, so I guess we're going to set up shop here and we'll sell outside the city. Because that's human nature. That's what they were doing. And Nehemiah said, you know what? Do that, and I'm going to put you in prison, or I'm going to thrash the living tar out of you, or whatever it is that, the punishment was. But Nehemiah was really clear. They knew that Nehemiah meant what he said. From that time forth, came they no more on the Sabbath. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves, and that they should come and keep the gates to sanctify the Sabbath day. Remember me, O God, O my God, concerning this also, and spare me according to the greatness of your mercy. Does it matter if there's somebody at the top that is doing it right? Does it change how everyone behaves? Yes, it does. Israel lived and died by their kings, whether their kings were righteous or their kings were unrighteous. If their kings were evil, the people did evil. And if their kings were righteous, the people did righteously. Why? There are always a few standouts either way. Most people can't go against the flow. They can't do it, or they don't do it well. Most people don't go against the flow. And that's why the end time is so important. Because there are so many people. Relatively, there are so few people that are willing to stand up and go against the flow. But that's what this is about in our time. It's about pillars standing up and going against the flow, against resistance. And there's going to be a lot of resistance against God's people. Big resistance. And we have to stand up and go against the flow, like Nehemiah did. And like some people do all the time, like Jeremiah and Isaiah and Ezekiel and the various prophets stood up and went against the flow completely. And some of the kings did the same. David did the same. He didn't do like Saul. When people stand up and do righteously, it's a good thing. And other people follow them. That's why it's so important that you do it right. Every single person who hears my voice and does it right makes a difference to the person standing next to you, next to them, next to whoever. If you stand up and do it right, people around you will stand up and do it right. This is what, in the end, God's harvest is about. And this is how you become a laborer in the harvest. Stand up and do it right, and your brothers will see you and do the same. And we've just got to do that. Or we'll be destroyed. Because God's not a respecter of persons. Anyone who does what he says, he will bless. And they will come into his kingdom. And anybody who doesn't, don't care what the circumstance is or who you are or who you might have been. Someone can steal your crown if you don't stand up and do what you're supposed to do. It's a requirement. And as we stand, more will stand. And at some point, we'll get up to that mythic number of 144,000. And we'll go well beyond it. 144,000 is a special group of people. There's lots more, too. Verse 22 again. And I commanded the Levites that they should cleanse themselves and that they should come and keep the gates. That's your job. Cleanse the inside of your cup and come and keep the gates of the house of God and of the temple of God and of the city of God. Stand as pillars on the wall that God made, is going to make, will make with you. That's what the end time's about. And in those days also I saw Jews that had married wives of Ashdod and of Ammon and Moab, and their children spoke half in the speech of Ashdod and could not speak in the Jews' language, but according to the language of each people. God's not okay with that. Remember, sheep and goats, wheat and chaff? And I contended with them and cursed them and smote certain of them. Do you know what it's like to receive a curse from a man of God? It's not nice. And he killed certain of them. I don't think it's just hit. And plucked off their hair and made them swear by God, saying, you shall not give your daughters unto their sons, nor neither take their daughters unto your sons or for yourselves. Plucked off their hair. Um, What does it take to pull someone's hair out? You're going to do what? Tie the guy in a chair and start pulling his hair out. Ow! I mean, really? That's torture. You will follow God or else. Is it any different now? No, except for we don't have to torture anybody because guess what? God's got people for that. God's got people for that. The beast in all the nations of the world. Yeah, he's got people for that. Doesn't need us to do that. He has other jobs for us. We're supposed to be nice. We're supposed to get along in the kingdom of God. We don't need to do what Nehemiah did. He's got people for that. And they're far better at it than Nehemiah was. I mean, he was an amateur, let's face it. Pulling a little hair out? Really? If that's the worst that happened to you, that's nothing. Not saying it would be pleasant. Not saying I would enjoy it. Not saying I would be happy to have all my hair plucked out in front of the whole world, because that's obviously where it was. He was trying to make an example to get people to do what God wanted them to do. Is God going to curse him for that? No, he's not. You know? Is he going to put plucked out hair in the Ark of the Covenant? Probably not, but he might have. He put golden hemorrhoids and foreskins of the Philistines and a variety of other things. And I contended with them and cursed them and smote certain of them and plucked out their hair and made them swear by God, saying, you shall not give your daughters unto their sons, nor take their daughters unto your sons or for yourselves. Because if you do, you'll be off wandering around worshiping other gods. And we'll have the same problem that we had to get us into Babylon in the first place. Didn't you learn anything from Babylon? From being 70 years in captivity? We're living in America and eating all the unclean things. And I mean that in every possible way. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? Yet among many nations was there no king like him, who was beloved of his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, even him did outlandish women cause to sin. Stay away from the pagan women. Stay away from the pagan women. Do you get that? Stay away from the pagan women. That's what he was saying. Because if you live with someone who's like that, gradually, eventually, you're going to do that stuff, stupid stuff. Even Solomon, David's son. Shall we then hearken unto you to do all this great evil, to transgress against our God and marrying strange wives? Should we listen to you and just go out and marry whoever we want, and then suddenly we're doing ancestor worship and you know, burning babies and all the various things that they did back then and we do now? I've had several friends that decided to be Buddhists because they just got involved in that. Usually with a woman, but not always. People are crazy not to obey God. Crazy. All of us, not any of us, are immune from this. We just get brain damaged and brain dead and do things that we should not to do. Shall we then hearken unto you to do all this great evil, to transgress against our God and marrying strange wives? or going to strange churches, or doing whatever it is that we shouldn't ought to do before God. And one of the sons of Joiada, the son of Eliashib, the high priest, was son-in-law to Sanballat, the Horonite. Therefore I chased him from me. How did he chase him from him? He had a sword or a knife or something, and said, not okay that you should be married to the daughter of our worst enemy. Get away from me. And he went after him with a knife or a sword or whatever. Why did he chase him out? Because there was going to be an influence against God and his people there. It was unclean and it was wrong, and there was already a problem, and Nehemiah was saying, I'm not having anything to do with this. And then what does he say? Remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and of the Levites. Remember where he had to correct everything and put treasurers over them so these guys didn't do what they weren't supposed to do and take God's tithes from them? Thus I cleansed them from all strangers and appointed the wards of the priests and the Levites, everyone in his business, so that people weren't taking advantage of the laws of God. And that's what's happening in all of the churches of God right now. Everyone's taking advantage, and no one is judging rightly or dividing rightly. Because if they were, guess what? It would show. And God's house would be in the process of being built. And it's not. Thus I cleansed them from all strangers and appointed the wards of the priests and the Levites, everyone in his business. You think God's not going to correct this circumstance? God's going to fix this. Why do you think he says to the first of the two witnesses, rise and measure the temple of God? Sometimes we're so ignorant that it's just pathetic. And for the wood offering at times appointed, and for the first fruit, remember me, oh my God, for good. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of David in the Psalms. You don't talk like this unless you have sin in your own life. I have sin in my own life. And I ask that God remember me for my good. And forget the evil. And forget the sin. And the reality is that we're all a bit of a mix. And that's why we have to be purified, tried in the fire, to remove all of the wickedness from us. It happens to everyone that God cares about. That's the story of the end time. It's purification. It's separation. You want to theme those two words, cover a lot of it. Next chapter is not what we're going to do. Remember what happened in Nehemiah's time. And know how it's going to work in this time. It's not a great deal different. Yeah, the focus is a little different. There are different things going on. And it doesn't matter if had some Ammonite or some Moabite or whatever. The question is whether you purify the inside of your cup or not. And whether you stand in the moment that God needs you to stand. And whether you walk according to all the things that God has taught us from Adam and Eve until now. That's what's important. That's what's necessary.